We're back to work. We've been talking about exteriors all week. First, let me introduce myself. My name's Rob Roderick. I'm with the National Tile Contractors Association. If you guys haven't been to our booth, it's right over here, 3938. You see that sign over there? It says National Tile Contractors Association. Definitely come by before you leave the show. I'm a technical trainer for the National Tile Contractors Association, so I go all over the United States doing training programs, educational programs. Been in the industry for about 35 years.
Hello everybody, I'm Matt Wellner out of North Carolina. I'm also a technical trainer with the NTCA. We travel the country doing educational workshops, talking about industry standards.
Right.
What are we going to talk about today, Rob?
Well, all week we've been talking about exterior installations and how they differ from interior installations. And the name of this program is Moving On Up, because we're actually going vertically. We're going up the wall. And whenever we do any training, we want to teach from the industry standards that we find in the American National Standards Institute and the guidelines that we find in the Tile Council North America Handbook. So that's what I have here. And I actually, if we look in the handbook, we have hundreds of recognized methods from the industry. And we have one for exteriors that we can do over wood or metal studs, 16-inch on center or less. And that's method W244. So that's what we got planned for you today. But whenever we start, we always want to make sure that every component in an exterior installation is rated for an exterior installation. Some tiles should not be outside. Some mortars shouldn't be used outside. Some grouts shouldn't. So once we move outside, we have to pay close attention to those products that we're using. Also, we need to check our surface that we're going to install our tile on. So we're going to prepare this wall for tile, but before we get going, there's always a section in our handbook in these methods that separates the tile guy's responsibility from everyone else's responsibility. It's called preparation by other trades. And what it says in there is that we need a flat, true, plumb, level surface.
I get that on every job, Rob. Every job, it's perfect.
Really?
Right?
Perfectly, yeah, happens all the time, right? I don't know, where do you live at?
No, I'm not telling that. Everybody will move there.
We're gonna move in on you. But what we want to do is we want to do a visual inspection for defects, because if we just go ahead and just start installing over this, we basically accepted it as a suitable place to install our tile. So we always want to check. Let's throw a level on that and see how we're doing.
Yeah, so we're going to check our outside corners here. That's looking pretty good. And then if I check this, well, that's looking pretty good. So we've got our corners checked, but we still got to check the rest of them to make sure they're in plane with each other.
Right. So we're not only checking for level and plumb, we're also checking for flat, and we're also checking for true corners. If, for instance, this wasn't level or plumb, that's when we need to go to the GC and have a conversation with them and try to get that straightened out before we proceed. Now, we have two standards for flatness that we talk about all the time.
Rob.
What's that?
Did you build this wall?
Yeah, I built it earlier today. Why? Is something wrong with it, or what's going on?
I think we should have let Chad build this wall.
Oh, look, I'm telling you, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. This will set right on.
Rob, I'm seeing like 3/8 of an inch here.
Okay, well,
we got some work to. How long do we have to do this demo?
Yeah, we're gonna have to speed it up a little bit here. But anyway, the standards for flatness are real simple. The large format tiles, the ones that have an edge that's over 15 inches, we can't have any deviation in the surface of more than 1/8 of an inch in 10 foot. What's a pretty rare occurrence that you're going to find a surface that flat. So almost everywhere you go to put board up, it's going to need some type of prep. So we actually have another stud here. I think he's going to try to fix what I messed up earlier and sister a stud in.
So Rob, I'm going to have you hold that right there, and I'll get ready. Just keep that balance for me.
All right.
I'm going to get screws started.
So if you show up to the job site and maybe there's already concrete board on the wall, that happens lots of times, we can still fix that. We can use some cementitious patch or use the right products. We don't want to use thin set because thin set's not designed to be used in that way. So basically, I don't know if you can see from the camera, but we're just running the straight edge up. We're moving the 2x4 over to the straight edge and fastening it. That way we have a nice flat plane where we can lay that concrete board. And we can get to that 1/8 of an inch in 10. All right. So let me see that real quick. So this is a tool that everybody needs when we're talking about flatness. This is what our industry says we need to use, a 10-foot straight edge. So every tile guy in the industry really needs to have one of these. You know, the concrete industry, they use FF numbers and FL numbers and lasers. This is what our industry says we need to use to check for flatness. I'm gonna set this down and help you out.
Yeah, I need
here.
that for a minute, please.
So we've also got some shimming material that we can use.
So because this middle one was so far out, we're gonna sister a stud there, but we've got just some minor adjustments to make on these other 2 studs. So I'm going to make these adjustments using this shim, and let's slide this down and make sure I'm getting it in the right place. Do we need it all the way to the bottom? I sure do. Let's go up to the top.
Looks like we're gonna need some over here too. I don't know, somebody messed this up. Right over here we've got a pretty significant gap.
Can we slide this up above this shim? Let me take a look here.
So
yeah,
Matt's
we're
just
definitely gonna need it.
He's just taking care of one of these studs at a time. We've still got a couple of others that we might need to do a little something with. So you always want to check with your local building codes. We're going to actually end up putting a vapor barrier behind this board. Some of them will require a vapor barrier and a waterproofer. There's all different, just depends on what part of the country you're living in and what the local building codes. But there's a variety of different options as far as vapor barriers that go behind the board and waterproof membranes that can go on the surface of the board. How are we making it? We're getting closer, aren't we?
We are.
I think you'll about have it after this pretty quickly, huh?
Let's check the top. Keep going. Yeah, I need just a little piece at the top. I got it.
You got it? All right, here's something we'll talk about while they're working on that. Anytime that we are working outside, we're going to see a lot different environment. Think about on an interior installation. The temperature in an interior installation might be 50 degrees to 80 degrees, maybe a 30-degree temperature range. But once we go outside, think about the hottest day in the summer and the coldest day in the winter, a lot wider temperature range. So we need to make sure we got the right materials to handle that. We need to make sure that everything's been sealed up. We talked about movement accommodation joints earlier, but one thing I want everyone to know, and super, super important, is there's going to be maintenance involved. Even if we do everything correct with an exterior installation, it's just not going to hold up like an interior installation. So one of the things that says in ANSI about exterior installations, it says all installations, but particularly exterior installations require periodic inspection and maintenance. And it goes on to say it's the owner's responsibility to provide for that. All right, so we've got some 15-pound roofing felt here, and we're gonna install this shingle lapped. And you also wanna think about your flashing. If you have something you wanna flash to, we may wanna run that down on the floor, but this needs to be overlapped about 2 inches, and we wanna do it shingle lapped. So if we have some vapor or some moisture that comes in, it's gonna actually run down and onto the next sheet. Back to my maintenance spill. How many of you guys have bought something and they try to sell you a maintenance plan? Has that ever happened? All right, it happens quite frequently. Well, ANSI says this is going to require maintenance, and the biggest thing is just controlling your customers' expectations. If they expect that to perform like it does on the interior, it's not going to. So one thing I encourage you guys to do is when you're doing these exterior jobs, have that conversation, say this is going to need some maintenance. and set up your customer with a maintenance plan for those exteriors. You know, if they're just left to themselves with the freeze-thaw environments that we have in most of the United States, they're going to slowly fall apart. So just to kind of explain that freeze-thaw process, what happens basically is if we have a tiny opening in the tile installation at any point and water works its way in that tiny little opening, well, once it freezes at night, it spreads out and it opens up a little bit more. Where I'm from, Springfield, Missouri, there's 70 freeze thaws a year. So can you imagine that happening 70 times? Opening up a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. So we got our 2-inch overlap. We've got everything furred out. We have a sister stud that we use. I might get this straight edge out of you guys' way if you need to.
Great.
All right. Watch out, nobody get hit in the head. I'm bringing her this way. All right, we got some new people. We're installing concrete board. So we always want to make sure that we got 16-inch on center if we're going to follow this method from the TCA handbook, making sure we've got the right materials, checking with our local municipalities to make sure that we're doing things according to building codes because it can differ across the country. But what it shows is the use of a vapor barrier or the use of a waterproof membrane. Now, when we're putting this board down, it's very important that we don't slam that against the floor. Anywhere that there's a change of plane, that's the possibility that we have movement. So you can see Matt has put down 2 1/4-inch spacers. That's going to allow for that movement accommodation that can happen at a change of plane. And that's super, super important for an exterior because all the different temperature extremes that we're talking about. Also, when we're using fasteners, we have to use the right type of fasteners. Oftentimes the board manufacturer will say use an alkaline resistant fastener and of course a waterproof fastener because the mortars that we're going to put on this board are high alkalinity and they can actually deteriorate the screw if we don't use the right type of screws. So, and we also want to look at the fastening schedule. How often do we need to put these screws in? Whenever we're installing this board, we also want to stagger the sheets. Now, I will have you notice that this manufacturer has a little sticker right there. That is definitely a bond breaker. We need to pull that off every time. That's just a little advertisement, but we want to take that off so our mortar can kind of get in that surface. Now, we talked earlier about exterior bond coats, and sometimes when we have a surface that we're going to tile on, it can be very, very porous. We need to give that surface a little bit of a drink before we actually install the tile, and this would be one of them. Most cement boards would fall in that category. We want to give it a little bit of a drink before we apply water. The reason we're putting that water on the surface is we don't want it to suck the moisture out of our mortar, and when that happens, of course, it weakens our mortar and it doesn't function as well as it could. So we'll always want to think about that when we're spreading our mortar. Now, when we put the second row of sheets here, we want to stagger them. We want to make sure that we don't have 4 corners ever. So we're going to stagger them. They've actually already pre-cut these. They found out the stud lengths, and they're going to put them up with a gap between these sheets themselves. I've got an 1/8-inch spacer here. That's going to give us our gap that the manufacturer recommends, and even ANSI, we have standards for how to install cement board that explain this as well. After we get this up, we're going to fill that 1/8-inch gap with thin set, and then we're going to come back over it with a 4-inch mesh tape, which is somewhat unusual. But for exteriors, and the method that we're calling out, W244, it calls for a 4-inch mesh tape. These guys are good. I didn't know we needed.
We had to bring in backup since you built this wall.
I know it. I kind of mess these guys up. They usually don't let me have a hammer or a screw gun or a saw, and somebody let me get a saw and a hammer, and this is what happens.
You just keep using a microphone, Rob.
All right. They got it straightened out though. So remember we sister studded, pull the stud in there to make sure we got our straight edge flat.
Now, Rob, how about this gap between our boards in this direction?
Yeah, we want to keep the gaps around the board, 1/8 of an inch. We're going to fill that with mortar and we're going to tape those. Again, with the 4-inch tape. Good question. All right, do you guys have any questions before we proceed any further? Question? Okay, so they want it to be monolithic, like one solid sheet. That's at least the board manufacturer's view on that. So we want to leave that gap in order to fill that with a little bit of thin set. And once we bring that tape in, so the process of this mudding and taping is first to go over it with thin set, filling that gap, laying our tape over that wet thin set, and then going back over the top of it with thin set. That was a great question.
We wouldn't want to skim over top of two sheets that are tight together. We want to bond them, and that's why we leave that gap.
Yeah. Say, yes, sir. The question is it the same for interior installation? Yes, it is. And there is actually standards. So our standards are found in ANSI, American National Standards Institute, and the ones that have to do with labor are found in ANSI A108. And we actually have a standard that speaks to all these points that we're talking about. Remember when I was talking about SSD? You see how that surface changed once we gave it a little bit of drink? But in the ANSI standards, they have it all laid out exactly how to install cement backer boards. Now, another thing you want to think about is making sure that you have dry, stable lumber. I know some people, they like to use pressure-treated lumber, especially in their showers. And, you know, I can appreciate the fact that they're thinking, well, if it gets wet, maybe that'll benefit me. But pressure-treated lumber has a lot of moisture in it. And so actually in that ANSI standard that I was talking about, it says you use lumber that's less than 12%, has less than 12% moisture to it. So, you know, pressure-treated lumber could be up around 35 to 70%. And what that means is that moisture comes out of that pressure-treated lumber. It can twist and turn and it can create problems. So also in the TCA handbook method that we were just talking about, it says use dry, stable lumber, which is kind of along the same lines as what ANSI is talking about. So we got step one done. We got the mortar put in that little gap that we left. Now we're coming back with our 4-inch tape. Good question. Any other questions? We got a little ways to go here. I'm going to kind of review again. Okay, all right, so we showed up. We saw that our studs were not in very good shape. And the way that we fixed that, we just sistered a stud. We took a 2x4, put our straight edge against the studs, slid the 2x4 to the straight edge, and put our screws in to fix that particular stud. The other ones we had some minor deviations in, which we just used shims. And then once we were done, we put our straight edge on it. We saw it's nice and flat, and that's when we went ahead and proceeded. Now, if it isn't level and flat, again, that's preparation by other trades. So someone else actually should do that. So that should be a change order. If you're going to do this type of work, according to our industry, you should get paid for it because it was supposed to be flat and it was supposed to be plumb when you arrive.
Now, Rob, I did that SSD and then I applied my mesh tape. Am I missing a step here?
Yeah, we need to go back over it again one more time with thin set.
I want to completely embed that mesh tape.
That's right.
Okay.
So first we filled in that gap, put our tape on it. So it's a 2-step, well actually 3 steps. We put the thin set, filling that gap, and kind of preparing the area to receive the tape. And then after we apply the tape, we come back over it with some thin set. Nice job, you've done that before. All right, we've got a couple of minutes. Does anybody have any questions? Question? Yeah, that's a great question. Should I let this set up before I install my tile? Well, it's dependent on a couple of different things. I mean, if it's the same thin set that we've got on there, you know, we'd always want to check with the manufacturer and make sure. I'm not 100% sure the best way to answer that question, to be honest with you. So normally it's let dry because you do such a large area, but I know some guys that have been installing it while it was wet, but here's what you definitely want to do. Check with your manufacturer. okay? Because I don't know that that's spelled out anywhere in the TCA handbook or in NTCA. I think I may say it's the dry. I'll have to look at that. That was a tough one. Any other questions? Do you have an answer for that?
I don't have an answer for that, but I do have a comment for something else. If this is an exterior wall, we might be dealing with some environmental conditions.
Oh yeah.
What are some things to consider? We got spotlights, but maybe we have sunlight coming onto our wall.
Yeah, that's a big deal. So basically, most of the stuff that we're going to use as far as mortars and membranes, they're made to be used at certain temperatures, around maybe 50 to 80 degrees. And when I say 50 to 80 degrees, I mean surface temperature. So,
right now it's like 70 in here. So this is 70, right?
Well, not necessarily. That's why we need to have a laser thermometer and always check the surface. So, you might wake up some morning and the sun comes out. Maybe it was real cold the night before. Let's say it was 30, 40 degrees. The sun comes out, all of a sudden it's 60 degrees ambient air temperature, but this wall or that concrete floor is much less than that. So we want to use that laser thermometer in order to make sure that we're right into that range. Again, it's surface temperature. We want to think about that with our mortars in the back of the truck. We want to think about that with the water and the hose that we're using that sits there all day in the sun. Make sure everything falls in that range or the materials won't function properly.
You gave an example of cold conditions there, but it would be the same for hot conditions,
That's
right?
Exactly
if it's
right, yeah.
110 in the afternoon at 8 o'clock when the sun's going down, it still might be too hot to set tile. So we might have to maybe set up some kind of a screen or a tarp or tent off an area so that we're not dealing with sunlight beating on our wall.
Or the thing that oftentimes works best is just to plan your installation during maybe the early morning hours. That's what we do in the Midwest, oftentimes starting maybe a little bit before light and working the morning hours, but as the sun comes up and the wind picks up, we have gotten all that work done. So you want to think about maybe sometimes even doing it at night. But another thing too, some of these products, like they might require in different cities to put a waterproof membrane on there. A lot of those are not UV stable, and some of them you need to cover that membrane in a certain amount of time. You need to cover it within 72 hours in some cases. So we've seen some failures where guys have put membranes on the wall, left it exposed for a month or two at a time, and then it deteriorated. Also, epoxies, anything like epoxy grouts aren't good choices for outside because they have a tendency to want to yellow. So always picking the right materials is super important. Now our booth is down here. I want all you guys to go down there and talk with us. If any of you are not members of the National Tile Contractors Association, we've been around for 75 years. It's a nonprofit organization, and there's a lot of terrific benefits to becoming a member. And come down there and we'll share them with you. What else do you got, Matt?
That's all I got. Do we got any more questions? I think that's it, Rob. It's what?
3938. And if you look right over here, ma'am, beautiful young lady, there's a National Tile Contractors Association sign right there.
That's what she was trying to get out of that question.
Yeah. I think she's trying to pick me up again.
You guys should go to dinner tonight.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Sure appreciate it.